Hey everyone, it's Anime Reaper coming at you with another What If Naruto Found Out About Uzumaki Clan at a Young Age, Part 11. This fanfiction was written by Dreener. If you like this what if and want more like it, please like and subscribe to my channel and don't forget to check the description and leave a comment down below. Without further ado, let's get started. Chapter 22, A Dream of Home. Ashura Uzumaki. Swing after swing, Fia was blocking them with her short sword that Lord Shivaku had brought for her to train in Kenjutsu. Her sword had an orange pommel and a dark scabbard with green lines around. The number 7 was carved in her scabbard. In Japanese. Ashura was wearing a tight red shirt underneath a black shirt. Her kunao holster was tightened around her right leg. Her scabbard of the sword tightened behind her back. She wore bandages on her right forearm and left forearm. Her skin around her hand was slightly irritated and bleeding somewhat from minor cuts around her knuckles and palm. She had bandages around her knee, wearing dark shinobi sandals. Ashura dodged her attack and swung at her head but stopped before it hit her, her blade close to her neck. Fia smiled warmly and put her small sword back in its scabbard, which was tightened to her hips. "You did good, Fia," Ashura complimented, slightly sweating from her forehead, while Fia didn't look that tired. She looked normal like always. Perhaps it was because of Kome, Asha didn't really know, but it didn't matter. It had been 6 hours since they started sparring. And eventually, Asha got tired, and she liked the most to train in Fuinjutsu and Kenjutsu. Ashura was about to return to the treehouse and rest and then train in her Fuinjutsu when Fia's orange eyes looked over her shoulder. "Come out, I know you're there," Fia shouted, but much to Ashura's surprise, her friend didn't look tense, and her hands were resting on her hips and not going to her pommel. Ashura turned around in time to see a boy around her age slowly walk out from behind the tree, but what immediately caught her attention was his long red hair, and the chakra he was leaking was way too similar to hers. It reminded her of her father's hair in a way. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to spy. I just felt your chakra and wanted to check it out," the boy explained and pointed the finger at Fia. Ashura was about to ask what was his name and possibly last name, but Fia beat her to it. "Is alright, number 9, we're friends here," Fia replied, smiling with a cute smile and her hands resting behind her head. Asha's eyes widened at the name Fia called her, and she understood this one here was the Jinhiriki of the Kyuubi but wondered why he was even here. It is not usually that villages leave their Jinhiriki to leave the village, and this boy was far away from Konoha. The boy smiled and walked closer, his hands looked relaxed, almost like he was talking to a friend, and he didn't have to think anything wrong would happen. Asha noticed it and decided to relax. "So she told you, Furball inside me wants to say hi to you too, number 7, the boy replied, smiling and walking closer. "Oh, that's good coming from him. But can I know your name, friend?" Fia asked, walking beside Asha, who still was quiet the whole time. Fia was pleased to see a former Jinhiriki, but what caught her attention is that Kome had told her that from all 9-tailed beasts, Kyuubi and Ichibai were the cockiest ones and the ones that hated humans the most. And the way her new friend was talking, as if he knew Kyuubi very well, almost like talking about a friend. Naruto, on the other hand, was slightly more interested in the Uzumaki girl next to him. As far as he knew, she was family to him. "Oh right, my name is Naruto Uzumaki," he introduced himself with an open hand on his chest. Ashura's eyes widened at his last name, "He's an Uzumaki. I'm not alone. I knew I wasn't the only Uzumaki, Data Bane," Asha thought to herself. Her smile spread on her face, even her eyes were smiling. Fia was just as surprised and was about to introduce herself and Asha. "My name is Ashura Uzumaki, and the loud mouth beside me is Fia," Asha introduced herself and pointed the finger at Fia, whose eye twitched at being called that. "So I was right, is good to meet family," Naruto said, smiling at Asha. He felt both good and relieved to meet an Uzumaki but to meet a Jinhiriki as well. Asha smiled at being called family, but at the same time, wondering where he came from since she hadn't seen him before in Taki, and she was sure she would have noticed another redhead around. "How about we go to my house and talk there?" Fia suddenly suggested. Both Naruto and Asha nodded their heads. They soon reached the treehouse. Naruto still looked impressed by the size of the tree and wondered if he could ever grow a tree as large as this one. "This house is beautiful, Fia," Naruto complimented, and they walked up to the door. "Naruto, as much as I enjoy meeting family, but where did you come from?" I don't remember seeing you before. Asha asked in hoping that he was a ninja of Taki so he could stay here. Naruto turned his head to her, his blue eyes looked amazing, almost like the ocean itself. It reminded her of the sea close to her house when her parents were still with her. I'm here with my sensei, and we will stay here for some time because of my training, Naruto replied. Asha frowned slightly since it meant that he would have to leave eventually. But she decided to ignore that thought for now and agreed to talk to him. Oh, that's amazing, but who's your sensei? Asha asked and rested on the edge of the floor, her legs hanging underneath. Naruto sat close. He's Jiraiya, what about you two? Naruto asked, interested in them. Asha turned to him, surprised. Wait? Jiraiya? You mean Jiraiya of the Sunin? She asked, surprised, and almost shouted, and Fia was just as surprised. Naruto just nodded his head. Asha wondered how good at fighting Naruto must be and if he could train with him. Wow, you're lucky, me and Asha train too, Fia replied, sitting in a branch to Ashura's left side looking at Naruto. Her head was resting on her hands, with the same cute smile on her face. That's amazing, if you want, we can train, and with Jiraiya-sensei too, he wouldn't mind it, Naruto suggested, and both Asha and Fia nodded their heads in agreement. Naruto then turned to Asha, and he turned to Sirius. It's good to meet you. Do you know any other Uzumaki? He asked, hoping that there were other of their people alive. Asha lowered her head at the question. She thought about her parents. Naruto understood it and felt slightly ashamed of reminding her of something terrible. I'm sorry, Aishao. Naruto was interrupted by Ashura. Is fine, I understand. Well, me parents were both Uzumaki, she replied and turned to look at Naruto. What about you? She asked hopefully that Naruto had anyone in his life. Naruto shook his head, despite knowing it still hurt him to talk about them for many years now. My mother was an Uzumaki, her name was Kushina. My father, on the other hand, I don't really know who his parents were, and my sensei doesn't know it either. Naruto replied, his hands on his knees, looking down at the grass below. Ashura raised an eyebrow at the name Naruto mentioned about his mother. She could have sworn that she had heard that name before. Noticing the atmosphere around had turned too much gray for her taste. So, friend Naruto, tell us something joyful about your life, Fu asked and hoping his life had been easier. Naruto rubbed his red hair and turned to look at Fu with a smile, and he didn't want to complain and talk about the bad times of his life, so he decided to talk about the good times. Naruto then started talking about his life in Hidden Leaf Village but avoiding the part of getting beaten and didn't mention every single insult he got. Ashura could feel he wasn't telling the whole truth but decided to ignore since everyone had the right to have secrets and probably was too bad to talk about it. Naruto kept talking for like an hour. This one time, Gamabunta and I made a prank. Fukazaku told sensei that I was going to train in a hazardous water in Mount Miyaboka. When he got there, he saw Gamabunta washing, and he immediately yelled at sensei for trying to spy on him, Naruto said, and they all shared a laugh. Ashura couldn't help but feel the warm chakra of Naruto, and she didn't know why it felt so good and relaxing. It felt warm, almost like looking at the sun. Fu wiped the tears with her hand from laughing and decided to ask a question. So I take it you and Furball are good friends? Fu asked since, from Komei's words, Kuwabai was the last Baijuyo to expect to be friendly towards a human. Hell, he wasn't even familiar with his brothers and sisters. Maybe he has changed, and did you just call him Furball? Komei asked Fu since calling him in a disrespectful manner wasn't the wisest course of action. Fu just grinned at her response and looked at Naruto. He nodded his head. Yes, Kurama and I are perfect friends, we have been for 3 years now, he replied. Wow, I never expected Kurama of all Baijuyo to be friendly, and since he knows his name, it means he trusts him, Komei said, impressed with Naruto. Naruto then turned to Ashura. What about you? How did you end up here? He asked her. Asha lowered her gaze slightly but decided to respond to her fellow clan member. Ashura then explained how it had happened, how she had ended up in Taki, and how she had become friends with Fu up to this point. Naruto listened without interrupting during the whole talk and wondered from which village the shinobis attacked her family and tried to kidnap her. He wondered if Togeji had any idea and decided to ask him about it later. I'm really sorry about your family Ashura, Naruto apologized with a sincere tone. Asha thanked him and told him that was nothing for him to apologize for. So you will become a Konoha shinobi? Fu asked since, from what she understood, Naruto would soon return to Konoha and start the academy and become a shinobi of Hidden Leaf Village. She hoped for him to stay here as long as possible. It wasn't every day that you meet a fellow Jinchuriki. And a good as well. I don't think I will stay in the village for that long. I'm still not strong enough, but once I will rebuild my homeland and bring back the Uzumaki clan, Naruto stated with passion in every word that taken by surprise both Asha and Fu. The redhead girl smiled at him, and she had the same idea, finding every Uzumaki and rebuilding their home as strong as it was before. And make the ones that destroyed her family pay. She could tell Naruto meant every word he said. Well, it seems we have the same objective, Naruto, she said smiling. Tell me, Naruto, are you good with Fuinjutsu? She asked since Fuinjutsu was the essential art in the world and one of the strongest. Naruto grinned and nodded his head. I'm at level 4, what about you? Ashura asked curiously, her fingers playing with her hair that rested on her shoulders. Level V, Jiraiya-sensei is a Fuinjutsu master, he's a good help, if you want, you can ask sensei to help. I'm sure he will be able to help you, Naruto replied, then his eyes went to the red seal on her wrist. Ashura felt honored to be trained by a Sunin and not to mention trained in Fuinjutsu. What is this seal? Naruto asked, staring at the seal. From what he could see, the seal looked like a storage seal but way too advanced, and second, it had a few writing that made it look like something other than storage seal. I really don't know, when my mom passed away, this seal appeared in my wrist and is like advancing. In the beginning, it had an empty circle in the center but now as you can see it is different, Asher replied. The empty circle had started growing what looked like small branches from 4 different locations, and slowly increasing to the circle's center. Right now, they had grown only halfway through the ring. Naruto softly touched her wrist, and Asha couldn't help but blush at his touch. Fu seemed to notice it and started grinning from ear to ear. Well, maybe Jiraiya-sensei can take a look, Naruto suggested and turned to look at Fu. How's Kome? He asked the green-haired girl. Well, she's good, she's a good company to have around and is funny, Fu replied kindly with a smile and closed eyes. Do you like Taki? Naruto asked slightly more seriously. Asha and Fu noticed that. Fu thought how to answer, but she knew he would understand if she told the truth of how things are around here. Not really the best place, the people here are just as stupid as the people in your village, Ashura replied since no one really liked Fu, except Lord Shivaku, all the others treated her like an outcast, like a demon, and since Ashura spent time with her, people had started looking at her in the wrong way too, not that it bothered her that much. Naruto understood what it meant, and sometimes he dreamed of the night when they attacked him. The names they called him, he had tried to forget it but couldn't, no matter how hard he tried. His scars in his mind made sure of that. I understand, Fu, then I would like to be your friends, Naruto said, smiling at both of them. Fu smiled, and so did Asha, her purple eyes shining from the light shining on her face. I want to be your friend too, friend Naruto, she replied and pulled a fist close to Naruto. He smiled and bumped his fist with hers. Suddenly he wasn't in the same place anymore, and he saw himself standing at the top of Kurama's head. Naruto looked around to see empty places, shadows covering the corners, and his eyes went to the center of the room. There were 3 circles, one smaller than the other. Torches around the wall. Naruto was about to ask where they were when he saw Fu and who he assumed was Kome slowly showing up from the corner. Kome had 6 enormous green wings with orange color at the edge. Dark veins spread through the wings, and one big green tail at the bottom of Kome. Her upper body looked blue color, and her lower body was orange and orange eyes like Fu. She had 6 limbs close to her head and 2 what looked like small spikes coming out of her shoulders. Her eyes turned to look at Kurama at Naruto. It'd been some time, Kurama, to be honest, I never expected you ever to have a good friendship with your Jinchuriki, Kome spoke, her voice sounding happy. Kurama growled slightly. He's a good brat, and not to mention he's an Uzumaki. I have seen for 7 years now, and I know the brat has a good head on his shoulders, Kurama replied. Naruto's eyes twitched at being called a brat but decided to let it slide for now. Fu eyed the big fox in front of her. I have to be honest, you're a very impressive furball, Fu suddenly said, smiling at Kurama, who growled loudly and released a bit of ki. Watch your mouth, little brat, and no one dares to call me that and to get away without getting wet, Kurama threatened, raising his voice and showing his teeth. Fu just smiled with her cute smile and didn't look bothered by the ki. I have trained Fia to stand my ki, the amount you're leaking is small for her, Komei informed him and turned to look at Naruto. You seem to be a good boy, young Uzumaki, and I'm curious to see where your road will lead, Komei said seriously and was very interested to know why Kurama has suddenly changed his attitude and decided to be friendly. Suddenly they were back in the forest. Asha was looking at them strangely. Fia moved away from her fist. What happened? Asha asked. She knew that sometimes Fia would like zoomed out when she talked with Komei, but it had been almost 30 minutes since they bumped their fists. Komei wanted to meet Furball, Fia replied. Naruto heard the growl of Kurama at being called like that from the little brat. Asha nodded in understanding and turned to look at Naruto. Hey Naruto, I saw your sword when you zoomed out, and it is very similar to mine, she said and pulled out her still-sheathed sword and put it on the floor close to Naruto. He pulled out his own and put it close to hers and had to admit that they were similar, both had the phoenix symbol at the top of the scabbard. Yes, you're right, mine belonged to my mother, she was known as the Red Death of Konoha, Naruto replied with pride in his voice. Asha was impressed to hear that. Wow, your mother must have been an excellent kunoichi, Asha said and putting her sword behind her back. Naruto gave her a sad smile and nodded his head, and tightened his sword to his hip. He then jumped down to the ground. How about a spar? Naruto suggested. Both Asha and Fia nodded in agreement and followed him. They soon reached the lake close to Fia's house. Naruto could see the waterfall a bit further away and thought that would be an excellent place to train his elemental manipulation of wind style. Who's first? Ashura asked. Naruto turned to look at them. He shrugged his shoulders since he had no problems with whoever was his first opponent. Fia told Asha to go first since she was better than her in Kenjutsu. Asha walked closer, and her hand went to the pommel of her sword, and so did Naruto's hand. Suddenly was only silence. Blue eyes looked at the purple eyes of Asha, whose gaze didn't move away. The wind flew around them, their hair dancing with the wind. Naruto noticed the stand of Asha. A leaf slowly started falling from a nearby tree, the leaf finally dropped, and they rushed towards each other. Yagura. A group of 6 shinobi raced silently through the treetops. The leader of this group appeared to be a male with a head of messy, light brown hair, pink eyes, and a scar running from under his left eye down his cheek. Despite his youthful appearance, he held a powerful air around him. He was none other than Yagura, the Yondaime Mizukage. Yagura stopped as he and his squadron reached the Hi-no-Kuni border. Raising his hand, he signaled for his group to halt. His eyes quickly scanned the area and decided that the area was safe. He slowly turned to face the 5 shinobi that had accompanied him. Well, I guess this is where we part, he announced. Observing their expressions, he noted that a few of them were showing reluctance at his words. Sighing, he asked, what is it? Haru was her name. One shinobi glanced at her companions before nervously standing forward and bowing her head. She was the youngest of his guards but the bravest. She was 17 years old, purple hair tightened to a ponytail. With all due respect Mizukage-sama, we believe this is too dangerous for you to go into Konoha's territory without an escort, she breathed out while still having her head down. Raise your head, she heard the Mizukage command. Doing as he ordered, she stepped back into line with the rest of her squadron. Yagura narrowed his eyes and gave each of the shinobi in front of him a glance. Do you know what we are doing here? He asked. To escort you to the Fire Country's border, sir, they replied in unison. Yes, the border, he repeated. So now, he continued, gesturing in the direction they came from, you have to go back to Mizu no Kuni. Once again, they began to look reluctant, and Haru spoke up. But what if you run into an enemy ninja? They might attack you, and we are very far from Mizu no Kuni. You could. Yagura interrupted, I am here on the Hokage swishes, so I should be fine, and even if something does happen, do you truly believe that I cannot look after myself? He said, frowning. I'm not a child. He gazed at the shinobi through blank eyes before nodding and speaking again. You will come to this spot in 1 week exactly, and I will return then. Hi. Alright, now you will go back to Mizu no Kuni and tell Kuroya that the escort was a success. Hi. Dismissed. Haru hesitated but soon left. The shinobi in front of him immediately disappeared on his word, and he could feel their presence getting further away. Yagura turned back to face the border of Hi-no-Kuni before he began running towards Konoha. Mizukage-sama, a letter has come for you from Konoha. Yagura glanced up from his paperwork and took in the man in front of him. Is that so? Yagura asked before taking the letter from the messenger's outstretched hand. When did this arrive? He asked, opening the letter. Just this morning, the man replied. I see, he replied as he began to read the letter. Suddenly, a wide grin split the Mizuki's face. Interesting, he whispered to himself. Looking up, he addressed the messenger. You're dismissed, but before you go, tell Kuroya to come here. Hi, the man replied before shunsen away. A few minutes had passed when a new man appeared before the Mizukage. He had plain brown eyes and long black hair that covered most of his face, however, a long scar that ran down the entirety of the right side of his face was still visible. He looked straight at Yagura's eyes, something most people would not do when talking to the Yondaime Mizukage. His eyes were blank, showing no emotions. You summoned me, Mizukage-sama, he asked unflinchingly. Kuroya, I told you not to call me that. Call me Yagura, Yagura said, crossing his arms in front of himself. Kuroya gazed at Yagura before replying, You summoned me, Yagura-sama. Yagura sighed before continuing, Yes, I just wanted to tell you that, in 2 weeks, I will be leaving, he said, a slight smirk playing on his lips. Kuroya's eyes stayed blank, but Yagura had known him for a long time that he could tell by the way his body stiffened that he was surprised by this news. Leaving to where exactly? Why don't you see for yourself, Yagura said, extending the letter to him. Kuroya stood, approached Yagura, and took the letter from him. He read the letter in silence before looking up at Yagura. You're not going to agree to this, are you? He asked in disbelief, shaking the letter slightly. These terms are ridiculous, it's obviously a trap. Or, maybe it's a genuine request, Yagura countered while standing and walking to Kuroya, taking the letter from him. Yondaime Mizukage, he read out loud, I am writing to you to request a meeting. This meeting will be, of course, a peaceful one, as I wish to establish an alliance between both Mizu no Kuni and Hai no Kuni. To do this, however, we must meet in person, therefore, I have made the following arrangements. Firstly, I have arranged for the meeting to take place in Konoha, 2 weeks from the time you receive this letter. This meeting, as I already stated, will be a peaceful one, and I am well aware of your country's reputation as the Bloody Mist Village, so I request that you come alone as to not disturb the peace in Konoha. Yagura snorted at this but continued reading. This means no escorts, however, rest assured, you will not be attacked by any Konoha shinobi while in our borders. Sincerely, the Sandaime Hokage. Yagura finished reading the letter before glancing back at Kuroya. Kuroya shook his head before saying, I know there's nothing I can say to stop you once you've made up your mind, so do whatever you want. Yagura kept running but could feel something wasn't right. I don't like this Yagura, Isabu suddenly said. Yagura was about to reply that everything would be fine when he stopped running and saw 2 figures walking towards him. Slowly dark cloaks with red clouds slowly revealed. Yagura knew one of them. I didn't expect to see you here, Juzo, the Mizukage called his former shinobi. The said shinobi gritted his teeth and glanced at the man beside him. Yagura noticed the man was actually young, dark hair, and Sharinan. Long way from home. Itaki Uchiha, Yagura said, gripping his staff, ready to attack. Itaka didn't react to being called by his name. I will need your help, my friend, Yagura said mentally, and his body started covering in red chakra, 2 tails slowly growing behind his back. Let's show them who's boss, Isabu said with Yagura's body before charging. Chapter 23, Feeling of Death. Naruto rushed at Ashura, his sword flew to her torso, but she quickly blocked it with her sword. They looked at each other before swinging again. Asha blocked his swing and backed away. 10 feet away, she put a smile on her face. Kenjutsu was her favorite way of fighting. She put her sword behind her hips and ran at Naruto with all her speed. Her speed was easily Lochinin. She lowered her whole body slightly. Her blade almost touched the ground before swinging upwards towards Naruto. His hands moved quickly and blocked the swing. The sound of metal hitting metal was heard throughout the forest. Ashura promptly took a step back and rolled, trying to him from behind. Naruto lowered his whole body before her sword made contact. Naruto smiled, impressed before swinging again. Asha blocked and added chakra to her sword, making it more sharp and deadly. Naruto noticed it and added wind in his swords, pushing the edge to shine and look slightly like invisible flames dancing around the blade. Asha saw and took 3 steps back. That sword like that could easily cut down trees. She put her right hand slightly behind her body, her sword behind her, and her left hand slowly going to the pommel. Naruto nodded before they rushed and clashed their sword together. Asha could see Naruto was faster than her and had more strength, but his fighting skills in Kenjutsu was easy to predict. She swung, and Naruto blocked and kicked her in the stomach. She made a hand sign, and her weight seals in her arms and legs released. Fia watched from afar, impressed since Asha had not once released her weights, only increasing them as time went on. She had not once released them with her, and to see her actual speed was something she was looking forward to, but she was curious for her new friend too. She could tell Naruto had more to show, and she was looking forward to what else he could do. Naruto understood she had released her weights and wondered if he should do the same, but then he shook his head. He wanted to see his speed against her with his weights on. Asha then ran at Naruto with medium chunin speed. She swung faster, and Naruto returned to the offensive. She swung. He could keep up, swing after swing. Naruto blocked all of them since he wanted to test his own speed against her, but what the problem was is he didn't have any style to use in Kenjutsu. Asha, on the other hand, looked to know what she was doing. Naruto blocked another attack and tried to attack, but she blocked it and immediately moved again. Her swing cut slightly in his palm. Naruto backed away and looked at his hand. Blood started leaking. Asha immediately stopped attacking and had a look of concern. Naruto just raised his hand, telling her that it was okay. She then noticed that Naruto didn't moan or yell despite the small wound. He didn't even look in pain, and that was a relief to her. She walked closer and softly touched his hand. Asha saw the wound slowly healing. After a minute, the cut was fully recovered, and Naruto looked up at Asha. She was thankful that the Kyuubi was healing Naruto, the same how Komei healed Fu. "Excellent fight, Ashura," he said to her, impressed. She smiled back, but she knew he had weight seals, which meant she wouldn't be able to win if he had released them. "Thank you, Naruto, but next time we fight, you will have to fight me without weights," she replied shyly. Naruto nodded in understanding and turned his head to Fu, who flew close to them. "My turn now," she said and pulled out her short sword. Naruto grabbed his sword in his right hand. The palm didn't hurt anymore. He gripped the pommel of the sword tightly, wanting to see if it hurt, feeling no pain. His blue eyes looked at Fu's orange ones. Later, Fu was breathing heavily, her hands on her knees. It had been 6 hours since Naruto had started sparring with them. And so far, he had more winning with Asha, 1 lose with her, and 4 wins since he released his weights. Fu had failed every time, but both Asha and Naruto had said she was good in Kenjutsu despite starting it only for 7 months. Fu had removed her weights in her arms and legs. She reached low chunin speed without them. But she hadn't used her chakra cloak during the spar. Komei had told her that she needed to better herself and not always depend on her chakra. Fu fully agreed with it. But if she would use her chakra cloak, she could reach high chunin speed. She wondered if Naruto could use the cloak as well but decided to ask some other day. Right now, she was resting her head against the grass. Asha had fallen asleep in the treehouse, and Naruto was resting his head against the tree, his blue eyes still open. "Where's your sensei, Naruto?" Fu suddenly asked, breaking the silence. Her right eye is slightly open, and looking at Naruto. She wanted to know more about her new friend, but she wanted to meet Jiraiya the Sunin as well. She wondered how strong he was and if all 3 of them could actually do something against someone like him. He snorted and stretched his arms and legs. "I don't really know. He was supposed to talk with Lord Shivaku, but I wonder what is taking him so long," Naruto replied, annoyed that his sensei hadn't found him yet. He would usually always find him. Most would take up to 30 minutes to be found by him, but now it had been 7 hours since he had left the office. Naruto decided to go back to the village and search for him when he felt his chakra coming towards their location. Naruto grinned and just decided to sit down again. Fu noticed his behavior and was about to ask when a voice was suddenly heard. "I see you have made a friend, Naruto." Fu looked up at a branch in front of her, a man standing. She didn't need an introduction to know who this one was. "Well, yes, Fu and Ashura are excellent friends," Naruto replied, smiling, his hands behind his head. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow at the unknown name. Lord Shivaku told him that Nanobijin Hiraki's name was Fu. "Who's this Ashura?" Jiraiya asked and landed in front of Naruto. "She's an Uzumaki like me, Jiraiya-sensei," he said enthusiastically, his hands fist. Jiraiya looked surprised to hear that Taki had an Uzumaki. Jiraiya could see how happy Naruto seemed to be because of it, and he felt happy for his godson. "Well, Introduce me to her then, Jiraiya said, and Naruto jumped at the treehouse and walked inside. Jiraiya crossed his arms and turned to Sifu smiling and walking closer. Naruto talked a lot about you, you must be an awesome shinobi, Fu said and wondered how strong Jiraiya of the Sun-In was. Jiraiya kept quiet and saw Naruto come out. Close to him was a redhead girl. Just looking at her, Jiraiya knew this one was an Uzumaki. He wondered if she had the same chakra chains as Naruto. Ashura jumped down with Naruto to see an older man with long white hair, 2 red lines trailing down his face. She could feel this one was strong, powerful. She bowed her head respectfully. "It's good to meet you, Jiraiya-sama," she greeted him respectfully. Jiraiya felt nervous about her behavior. "No need for that. Ashura was it. Every friend of Naruto is a friend of mine," he stated. She smiled and raised her head. Jiraiya smiled back, and Naruto told him more about Ashura and Fu. He noticed him calling her Asha but decided to ignore it for now. After a long talk, he heard how they trained in Kenjutsu, and he saw that Ashura was good at Fuinjutsu. But then Ashura suddenly asked something he didn't need asking. "I heard you're the author of a book called Ika Ika Paradise," Ashura suddenly asked, her purple eyes looking at him. This caught Naruto's attention as well, since he had noticed that title in a few books of Togeji and wondered what the books were all about. He knew the book was famous. From the cities he had visited, he had seen the book in every single shop. Usually were only a few left. Naruto would usually try to buy it, but he was training and had ignored it for now. Jiraiya started sweating, feeling the gaze of all 3 children in front of him. Rubbing his hand against his hair. Ho. Have why you read it? Jiraiya asked, stuttering. He wondered how the likes of Tsunade would react, and he hoped to God that she hadn't read it. Asha shook her head, much to his relief. "No, but I saw that it sold very fast, but the seller told me I couldn't buy it since I'm not old enough. Can I borrow it from you?" she asked kindly with puppy eyes. Jiraiya started sweating even more. He could see Naruto was curious as well, but Kushina would kill him from beyond the grave and then torture his soul for eternity if he dared to give him the book, and second, all 3 were still very young. "Maybe when they become genin. I can't give it, but you can read it once you become a genin," Jiraiya replied fast, sighing in relief thinking that this was over. All 3 frowned at his reply. Naruto was about to ask again, but Jiraiya-sensei raised his hand. "How about I teach you in Fuinjutsu, Asha?" Since Naruto mentioned you liked it, the mention of training in Fuinjutsu immediately brought a smile to her face. "Yes, we can start now, Data Bane," she shouted happily. Jiraiya couldn't help but feel a familiar feeling with what she said. He sighed, pinching the bridge in his nose, and followed her in the treehouse to train her in Fuinjutsu. After they left, Naruto turned to Fu and decided to help her in her ninjutsu. "Fu, since you have Kome means, you can use Shadow Clone's jutsu to help your training," Naruto stated. Fu raised an eyebrow, not understanding where he was going with it. Naruto then explained how Shadow Clones worked and how she could train faster. Fu beamed but then asks, "What about Asha-chan? She could use this as well," she quickly added. "I'm not sure if Asha can use it. She might be able to use 2 to 3, but for a very short time. We have our friends to help us, but she doesn't," Naruto explained, already feeling bad that Asha couldn't use it. Fu frowned but still thought that her friend would significantly improve from that jutsu. "I will show her as well, but tell her to use only 2 clones max," Naruto suggested, and Fu nodded but still not liking it. Naruto explained how to do the jutsu, and he himself made 100 clones to help in the last fire elemental manipulation training and 100 clones for water. Naruto was sure that would be easier with all the amount of water around Taki. Yagura. He rushed at his former shinobi of Kiri. Juzo brought up Kubikari Basho to block his claw, which was almost like a sword itself. His giant sword swung towards his head, but he used his right hand to block it before punching him in the chest and throwing him across a tree. He tried to rush at him again. When Itaka showed up in front of him with a kunao, he blocked his claw with his kunao, much to Jinhiraki's surprise. Yagura jumped away from him before landing on his feet and started doing hand signs. Itaka understood what he was about to do and started doing hand signs. Water style, wave rush. Fire style, fireball. Yagura threw a massive amount of water from his mouth. Itaka threw a giant fireball. Both jutsus collided, creating considerable steam around. Itaka's fireball was able to keep up with his water jutsu, much to the surprise of Yagura, who was sure that his jutsu would be superior. Gritting his teeth, Yagura was starting to get annoyed. "Time to end this," Yagura said with Isabu's voice before coiling himself with his two tails around him. Yagura was enveloped in a blackish-purple barrier that blocked Juzo's view of Yagura. A second later, the barrier exploded with a roar, and their eyes widened to what they saw. It was the Mizu cage, however, it wasn't the one they knew. Yagura was now completely enveloped in the Isabu's chakra as it became his own skin. His head was a shell to protect it, and he had 3 tails in his back. This was his version 2 cloak, and he looked like a miniature Isabu. Juzo moved close to Itake, who could see the new form of the Mizu cage. He knew this was a problem, and the only way to counter was with Mangekyo Shari-nan. Steam moved away from the Jinhuriki. Juzo felt frozen from fear seeing what was in front of them. They both saw and felt the overwhelming chakra. Sweat rolled down Juzo's forehead. His hands started shaking. They didn't have time to think as Isabu was preparing for his next attack. His tails were coiled around Isabu, ending just above his head. Blue and red chakra were seen floating in the air. Suddenly all the chakra started compressing until it formed a perfect sphere still hovering midair. Itake's eyes turned Mangekyo, which looked like a 3-blade shuriken. He knew what the Mangekyo would do to him, but he needed it now. "Meet your end," Isabu yelled and threw the bomb towards them. The ground started shaking. The ground beneath the bomb split like paper, throwing debris around the air. Juzo used his big sword to block the attack without knowing what else to do, which exploded in contact. Itake was thrown away from the force of the explosion. His black cloak had burned in a few places, and his hands were screaming from pain. He quickly stood up to see Juzo against a tree, but his sword had pierced him in the stomach, blood coming from his mouth and his wound. He slowly turned his head to Itake. Itake, are you run?" he warned him. Itake turned to see the Mizu cage preparing another bomb. Itake focused his chakra on his right eye. Blood slowly started rolling down his right eye like tears. "Amaterasu," Itake whispered, and the Jinhuriki was engulfed in black flames. He started screaming in agony and shaking his head and body, trying to remove the flames from him. Not knowing what else to, Yagura ran away. Itake released a sigh of relief and turned to his comrade, and his blood had spread all over the ground. Yozo looked at him with a slight smirk on his face. "Don't look at me like that, you don't need to be a medical shinobi to know my time has ended," he said, struggling as his legs started feeling numb, his hands slowly losing strength. "Do you have any last words?" Itake asked him. He smiled through his teeth. "I want my sword with me." His hand fallen in the ground. His eyes stopped moving. Itake said a small prayer and put the handle of his sword in his hand. Later, Yagura was panting. He returned normal, his skin burned in several places, and he started coughing. While he was running away, Isabu told him to turn his body in the first form chakra cloak. After doing that, the black flames had moved away from his skin and started burning the chakra cloak instead. Yagura then slowly had made the part burning his chakra fall in the ground. It took a lot of effort, but he finally got rid of the damn thing, but he had lost a lot of chakras. Even Isabu told him to rest. And the pain around his body wasn't stopping. His head resting against a tree, he decided to go back to his village when he felt a presence behind him. Despite the pain, he stood up and turned around to see a man with a mask, the same black cloak with red clouds. His mask covered his whole face, except his right eye. The mask looked orange with lines that collided in the right eye, almost like a spiral. Looking closer, he saw that it was a Shari-nan. Backing away, he grabbed his staff tightly. "Who are you?" the young Mizu cage demanded. His whole body was screaming from pain, and he knew he couldn't do much right now. The man just stood there and chuckled at his question. "Who am I doesn't matter, soon the Hidden Mist village will pay for what they have done," he stated with a deep tone, his voice full of hatred. He pointed the finger at Mizu cage before Yagura could do anything. He felt everything go dark. Isabu. He was resting on the floor, and he had spent a lot of chakra in the fight. That's when he felt a presence other than Yagura inside the seal. Looking around, he saw a man slowly walking out of the shadows. His eyes narrowed, and he clenched his teeth. "Who are you, mortal?" Isabu asked furiously that someone would come here. Only Yagura had that right and not this mortal. The man laughed, his hand moved to his mask and moved his mask to his left side, showing his fully matured Shari-nan. "I'm Uchiha Madara," the man stated before Isabu felt his whole body felt like in a fire. In front of his vision was the Shari-nan. He couldn't shake that vision away. He tried it and yelled at the top of his lungs, his eyes turned to Sharingan, and everything went dark. Naruto, after 5 months. He stood in front of the waterfall, multi-clones beside him, they all had their hands on the water, trying to split the waterfall. Naruto was still in Taki. Lord Shivaku had allowed him to stay here for as long as he wished. Jiraiya-sensei knew him well. His bond with Ashura and Fia had grown. Learning Shadow Clone Jutsu, Fia had started training her elemental manipulation with the help of Jiraiya. Ashura, on the other hand, because of her Uzumaki blood, she had a large amount of chakra despite not being a Jinhiraki. Toujiji had stated that she had a low Jonin level of chakra. Because of that, Ashura could use shadow clones to train, but only one clone, Jiraiya, had warned her that it would be dangerous to use more than one. Asha had not complained, she had used the clone to start training her elemental manipulation. Jiraiya had shown her what she needed to do, and both he and Naruto were surprised to see she had fire and water affinity. The old Sunin then had told them that Fia had high wind affinity, and Ashura had high water affinity. One thing that had surprised Naruto was during a spar with Ashura. Naruto used his sword to swing at her chest, she took 2 steps away, the blade barely missing her. Jiraiya was keeping his eyes on them. His eyes were like a hawk looking at every move they made. Close to him was Fia, smiling at them. Naruto suddenly used his red chakra chains to grab her sword, and his chains tightened around her sword. The shock was written all over her face, but before he could do anything, he saw silver chains flying towards him and tightened around his sword. He looked to see the chains coming out of her left sleeve. Ashura was smirking at him. Naruto smiled at her, and she smiled back at him, his chains returned to his chest. Naruto was surprised to see that but quickly understood that she was an Uzumaki too. He wondered if there was any other Uzumaki outside beside him and Asha. He hoped that there were. But he wondered if he would ever meet them even if they were out there. Naruto kept trying, but the dim waterfall wasn't splitting in half, he was panting. He had been here for 4 hours now. Jiraiya-sensei had changed his weights again, and he now wore 250 pounds on his legs and 220 pounds on his arms. The same goes for Fia and Ashura. He also warned them not to try to raise their weights too much immediately, which would cause damage to their bodies. Naruto had completed his water and fire training, now, he only needed wind and earth. Since he had arrived here, Naruto had not once used wood style. Not that he didn't trust Asha and Fia, but he wanted to wait until he got better at it. With the help of Jiraiya-sensei, Asha had quickly reached level V in Fuinjutsu. Fia, on the other hand, wasn't really fond of Fuinjutsu, but she had completed level I with the help of Jiraiya-sensei since she wanted to know how to seal things to travel when in missions, or just traveling around the elemental nations. Naruto, you will soon return to the village, what is wrong? Kurama suddenly asked him. He could feel the anxiety rising slowly in Naruto the more closer it got for him to return. Naruto gritted his teeth tightly. After 4 months, he would return to Hidden Leaf Village, and he wasn't looking forward to it. Despite having friends there, he didn't want to see their stares again, their insults. And if anyone was dumb enough to try and hurt him, he would show them why Uzumaki clan is strong. I don't want to talk about it, Kurama, Naruto replied and focused on his training again. He had decided that his first jutsu to learn after completing his elemental manipulation would be Uzumaki style, Phoenix. It was one of the jutsus his mother had left him. He knew that it was a powerful one. Naruto had decided to tell Asha about the jutsu before he left. Grunting, he returned to his training. Itake. He looked at the clear water in front of him, his body resting at the edge of a dock, his right leg hanging, his foot close to touching the water. The wind was flying around him, the seagulls flying high in the air. His Sharingan in his eyes as he heard footsteps behind him. Itake didn't move, he just kept staring at the water. I will be teaming up with you starting today. My name is Kisame Hoshigaki, former of the Hidden Mist, one of the 7 ninja swordsmen, so please do make your acquaintance, Kisame stated walked closer, a big sword resting on his shoulder. The sword was covered in bandages except for the handle, which looked like made of bones. And you're Itake Uchiha, formerly of the Hidden Leaf. I've heard the rumors that you've slaughtered all of your fellow Uchiha clansmen, Kisame stated with a grin on his face. His face pale, his eyes like of a shark. With 3 small black marks going down from his eyes. I think that we are like you and I. That's the reason I wanted to be teamed with you in the Akatsuki. It's really indescribable, isn't it? Killing your comrade is quite a sensation, wouldn't you say so? Itachi, Kisame taunted him. Hearing those words, Itachi remembered his parents, visions of his parents dead by his hands, his little brother crying, and Izumi smiling at him and telling him that she loved him. "You talk a lot," Itachi interjected, his voice deep and filled with a hint of grief. "You don't understand me. You don't even understand yourself. You were just a thug who got lost in the mist and ended up here. You can't even control where you're going. Am I wrong?" Itachi asked. Kisame gritted his teeth slightly and moved his sword close to Itachi's shoulder, but he didn't even flinch. He kept his gaze at sea in front of him. "Do you want to know something interesting? Most sharks are ovoviviparous, which means that the eggs hatch inside the female's body before the young are born. However, with some kinds of sharks, the number of eggs that hatch will differ from the number of young that emerge out of the mother's belly. Do you know why that is?" Kisame asked as a wave slammed against the dock. "Because of cannibalism. Right from the moment they hatch, they start eating each other inside their mother's uterus. The fratricidal warfare begins as soon as they're born to each shark. All the others are just food to be eaten starting today. You are an Akatsuki member and my companion, so be wary of me," Kisame stated. Itachi slowly evolved his Sharingan to Mangekyo Sharingan. "Same goes for you," he said with a promise on his words. Kisame chuckled at his words and moved away from his sword. "Let's be friends and have some fun. All right. And hope that we will not end up as each other's final opponents. No one who dares to raise their hand against a comrade ever dies a decent death. Remember that," Itachi stated, thinking of Izumi. "Well, that means our fates are sealed. Seems you and I are depraved and worthless," Kisame said. "Not true. We are both humans. Not fish," Itachi said and stood up and turned to look at Kisame and started walking away. "No matter who you are, you do not truly know what kind of man you've become. Until you reach the very end." 4 years of training arc completed. Next is, Genin of Konoha arc. That all for What If Naruto Found Out About Uzumaki Clan at an Early Age, Part 11. If you like this story, please show your support by liking the video and subscribing to my channel, and also show your support to the author by hitting the link down in the description. Thanks for listening, and until next time.